What if there was a peak performance power tool that you could train your mind to pull out whenever you needed to turn up and become the best version of yourself, when you needed to put in an effort like an Olympian or a pro athlete or a mega successful CEO? Well, there is, and it's all about tapping into the power of your secret identity and then creating and stepping into them to change not only the way your brain works, but the way your body performs in an instant. And that's what this episode of the Untapped podcast is all about. Welcome to Untapped, a weekly podcast where you can learn, apply, and share how to go beyond your human potential to live your best possible life. Join me, Natalie Sisson, on my personal challenges and experiments, including training for triathlons, as well as my interviews with inspiring everyday people who've pushed through their own mental, physical, and entrepreneurial boundaries to reach their full potential. So, as you know, right now I'm training for triathlons. More importantly, my new big-ass goal is training for a half Ironman. What is a half Ironman, or Iron Woman in this case? It is a very, very long endurance race across 3 disciplines of swimming, cycling, and running. And it's about 9 months away from now when I'm going to be enduring this epic race, which is going to push me to my limits. For this, I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been listening to lots of audiobooks. I've been upping my training. I've been really starting to immerse myself in the world of triathlons because I'm pretty new to the sport and there's a lot that I don't know. And while there's a certain amount that I can do to improve my physical performance, and that will come through the training that I'm doing every day that's set by my coach. It'll also come through with the nutrition that I'm adding into that so I don't fatigue or get tired, which I'm certainly haven't got right yet. And it will come in through the strength training that I'll add to the actual training of just being in the pool or in the ocean or on the bike or running. But there's another part that I can train that could be just as powerful as the actual physical activities that I'm going to be putting my body through. And that is my mindset. And in fact, I think it's probably the most powerful tool because when I was at the Kinloch Triathlon, which I think I talked about in a couple of episodes ago, I think one of the biggest things that I was able to overcome or work on for that was the little voices inside my mind, the inner critics. Now, if you haven't checked out episode 9, please do, because it's all about how to use your inner critics as a force for good. So that was the most recent episode, and I had this massive breakthrough recently of reframing what an inner critic is, and I think you're going to love that episode. It's around 15 minutes, and it's a goodie, so please go and listen to it, and then come back to this one, because this is the follow-on. This is taking your inner critic, or what I like to call your mirror of truth, to the next level. This is when you can't find that extra step to really jump out and go, yeah, you know what, I'm going to turn up today and I'm going to perform, whether that's speaking on a stage, whether that's out on the field of play, whether that's in your relationship, any area of life where you feel you're kind of underperforming or that you've maybe reached what you think are your limits, but you need to pull on something else to really push you further. And this is where I have been loving Todd Herman's new book, The Alter Ego Effect. So Todd Herman has been coaching champions in every field for over 20 years, and he's been on a mission to help them bring out their most heroic self, as he puts it, to transcend the forces pulling them into the ordinary world. And it's not just for athletes and champions, it's also for entrepreneurs, for sales professionals, for creatives, for families, and basically for you and me. And he reckons that this alter ego is the fastest and most powerful way to bring the best of you to the world you live in. So I absolutely lapped up his audiobook in around 2.5 hours when I was out on some long training rides, and I loved it. So I'm going to attempt to sort of take you through the key stages in developing your alter ego, but I would highly recommend that you grab a copy of his book. So if you head across to nataliesisson.com/podcast and click on this episode all about creating your best heroic self to tap into your potential, you will find the links to his book in there, plus a vlog that I am doing on this, just so that you have lots of different ways in which you can consume this content and put it to use straight away, because that's what I'm here to do for you in the Untapped podcast. All right, let's move on. So in his book, he takes you through why it's really important to have an alter ego. And when I first started listening to him, I was like, wait a minute, are you trying to tell me to be somebody else, like to lose myself in the moment? We did just have Eminem come to New Zealand, so I'm using that quite a bit. You got to lose yourself in the moment. You got to want it. You better never let it go. Anyway, I digress. So Todd is not actually telling you to suddenly forget about yourself and try and turn up and become somebody else. But what he is saying is that it's a really powerful tool to take on and activate some of the characteristics of that hero or heroine that most resonates with you. So an example of this for me in my triathlon is when I'm maybe feeling a little bit flat on the run or on the bike or in the swim, that I can channel a alter ego or heroine that I have been visualizing and working through in my mind and really channeling. So, for example, I might take Chrissy Wellington, who is a multiple-time Ironman champion. That woman is a beast. Well, actually, she's quite slight and diminutive, but she is so incredible as an athlete. And she has such a strong mindset and sense of competitiveness. And she has won so many Ironman champions, beating most of the men in some of these races. And so at a time when I might be feeling a bit fatigued or a bit jaded, I want to become Chrissy Wellington. And I don't want to just become her. I want to channel her strength, her determination, her perseverance, her athleticism, and bring it into my own performance. It's a little bit like when Diane becomes Wonder Woman. She steps up to be the absolute best possible version of herself and go on to save the world. Todd goes on a lot in the book about various superheroes and what you can learn from them. And typically, if you think about it, they often have a disguise or a different way of showing up in the world when they're just wanting to fit in as humans versus when they're superheroes. And he goes on in the book to tell you how you can do that by naming your alter ego, by giving it a totem, which is a thing that when you put it on or have it near you or with you, automatically is like a trigger. It's kind of like a pill almost that you can take that has a magical effect. So, for example, Clark Kent and Superman. Todd goes on about this in the book, and he says, which of these do you think is actually the alter ego? And most people, when he's speaking at conferences, say, it's Superman. And he's like, incorrect. It's actually Clark Kent. Superman is always Superman. He has amazing strength and power, and he wants to show up and obviously protect and save the world. But he has to be Clark Kent, dress like Clark Kent, and put on his glasses to disguise himself to just become one of the everyday people so that he can better understand humans and their very nature. And what I liked about this is it means not only do I get to pick and name who my alter ego is, and in this case, you could use, for example, your first name and the name of the person that you want to be. So, for example, if your first name's Shelley and you really want to be an amazing speaker like Oprah Winfrey, you can call yourself Shelley Winfrey. You can incorporate other bits of your name into the person's name that you want to become. You can create your own version of the name. You can mix things up, whatever it is that works for you. And there's a couple of naming philosophies that he talks about in his book, so it's just best that you listen into it. But it's really fun. You get to be creative with it. So you get to name your alter ego. Then you get to essentially create a totem that is going to be with you always. So maybe you want to put on a pretty cool, crazy triathlon suit that has and embodies a lot of the things that you want to have. So if I want to be, for example, Xena Warrior Princess, I might find a triathlon suit that kind of has some of that medieval power, strength, goddess type symbolism in it. So that's my totem. That's the thing that I can actually physically see or touch or sense or have with me that gives me access to that superpower, if that makes sense. And he also talks about this thing that you can put on to transform into that person. So Todd Herman always used to look quite young, and he never really felt like he was getting that respected when he started out in this journey many years ago. So he used to put on glasses because in his mind and what he witnessed and saw, and this isn't necessarily true, but is that intelligent people wore glasses. So the minute he was able to put on his glasses, he became his alter ego of Richard, which is one of his names. But Richard is intelligent, poised, mature and really respected. And he would use Richard every time he went on stage so that he could show up in front of the audience and command that respect. He would use it in front of his clients. So he would drop into his alter ego of Richard. And he had a very, very clear hero story for Richard, why he got to where he was, who he was, what drove him, what his purpose was. So that's another thing that Todd recommends you do is name your alter ego, give it an origins story of the hero so you can really buy into how did this person show up? What are their values? What's their mission? What's their purpose? You give it a totem so that you can put something physically on that kind of transports you into them and you can take it with you. And this is really essentially a trigger that you can use to get yourself into that place. Now, you can have multiple alter egos depending on what stage you're at. So if you want to be, for example, an incredible author, you can have somebody who you really respect and admire, even if it's a made-up character, but you can have that person who embodies all these values that you really want in that time when you are feeling fearful or judgmental about yourself, or you're not showing up as the author that you want to be. You can use this if you want to speak on stage and you're absolutely petrified of speaking. By channeling your alter ego, you get to step out of yourself and embody the characteristics of these incredible speakers that you want to be like. So you can start to see how it's not just for performers or athletes. It is absolutely for the everyday person who just needs to tap into their alter ego to transform how they're feeling, both physically and mentally. You may be wondering how this works, and the key to this all is the fact that your brain cannot hold two competing thoughts at the same time. So you can't simultaneously see yourself as a champion and a loser, or confident and scared, or strong and weak. One of those two thoughts is always going to win out over the other with your behavior and ultimately your results. So your brain, as Todd says, is going to accept the most dominant thought as truth, and your actions are going to reflect it. So basically, what it comes down to is you want to shift the paradigm. You want to create a reality where the champion version of you shows up on the field of play every single time. And so that is what Todd goes through in his book. Essentially, it is all about pulling your secret identity in at the times that you need it most to really transform your life. And here's a little quote from Todd that I think sums it up beautifully. At the end of your life, you won't remember the thoughts or intentions you had. You'll remember the actions you took. You'll judge yourself by how you showed up, by what you did, what you said, how you acted, and whether you performed the way you knew you could in any of the stages of life. So why is this alter ego such a powerful tool? Because it is essentially allowing you to release your most heroic version of yourself and move away from your trapped self. And this is something that Todd really devotes a whole chapter to, this trapped self. What is that? It's the part of you that doesn't feel like it's showing up in life like you want to. It's the part of you that feels like you're avoiding certain things or you're feeling pressured to act in a certain way. And if you're listening to this, you will absolutely have had this experience, right? It's what your parents think of you. It's what your family members think of you. It's what your friends, your co-workers, your teammates and others kind of think that you should be acting like in this life. There's all these different forces and pressures from the external environment that end up shaping us, that we become this person that acts within these rules and things that actually isn't necessarily us, but we've kind of been like that for so long over life that we've shaped ourselves into this version that is now trapped. So how do you go out of the trapped self into your heroic self? Well, Todd Herman has this field of play model, and it is essentially a way of continuing to, add layers into this model to help you out. So you start with your core self. What is your possibility? What is your potential? And then the next layer is your core drivers layer. And that is what motivates you. So really tapping into what lights you up. Then you go into the next layer, which is the belief layer. And that's how you define what you do. Then you go into your action layer, which is how you show up. And then you go into your field of play layer, which is what is happening right now where you need to activate that alter ego. And essentially by going through those layers and stepping into them, you go out of the ordinary world into the extraordinary world. And one of the things that I really like is that when you're in this field of play that you're building your alter ego for, there are elements of that field that are going to be especially challenging to you. And it's in these moments that you have this opportunity to fully embrace your secret identity and show up the way you most desire. So what the heck is a moment of impact? Because this is where essentially you get to bring out your alter ego. Well, in your personal life, this might be if you lose a job, if you have an epic fail in your business. It could just be a transition. I guess a moment of impact for me was around 2 years ago when I transitioned from being the suitcase entrepreneur into being this freedomist in my own country and settling down. Another moment of impact is comparisonitis, which I've talked about here on the podcast. It could be related to emotional stress. You might have a real major wake-up health call, and that is your moment of impact. You might be making some really major decisions. In business, it could be cash flow. It may be around overwhelm. It could be around media attention. In sport, it may be you get injured and you really have to call on everything you've got to bounce out of that. It could be around social stress. It could be around getting distracted and not being able to be as motivated. Now, these are all your moments of impact. And in that moment, that's where you need to step up and fully embrace your secret identity so that you can bring your A game. And I really liked this because it kind of, for a sports person or someone who enjoys sports, it is really about when you step on that field, whether that is the business field, the sports field, the relationship field, the financial field, you need to bring your best self, your alter ego. And it's these moments of impact where I guess we make the biggest leaps and bounds, because if we can show up in that moment with these new activated characteristics that serve us, every single time we sort of go through that and we make it out the other side, we are starting to take on more of that. We are starting to really develop full belief in our abilities and our strength. And what the alter ego does is it allows you to release your heroic self. And I guess the whole sense of the book, and by the time you come to the end of it, is that you realize you're not hiding from yourself by using your alter ego when you need it most. You actually start to take on the characteristics of your alter ego to the point that one day you just are. And there's a beautiful example where he talks about Beyonce. So the beautiful, amazing, talented singer, songwriter, and performer. Now, you might have heard that Beyonce wrote an album and it was titled Sasha Fierce, and that is actually her alter ego. And I finally found out the origin story behind this. So she was actually, and still is, probably quite religious. And back in the time when she was starting out singing with her group, they were starting to get into some slightly risque music and lyrics, and she actually couldn't really bring herself to sing that. It felt very at odds with her upbringing, this religious upbringing, this good-hearted, good-natured, sort of morally abiding woman. And so what she did is she created this alter ego called Sasha Fierce, where she could really let rip on stage and tune into the saucy, sexy minx who was very sexual, very powerful, very courageous, and very bold. And what's fascinating is that once she'd released Sasha Fierce, the album, that was kind of one of her best albums, after that she no longer used that name as her alter ego because she had become Sasha Fierce. So if you were thinking, oh, is Todd trying to tell me not to be myself? No, he's saying take on the best, most wonderful, heroic version of yourself that you admire in superheroes and mentors and ambitious, successful people and athletes and anybody that you kind of want to be where they're at, and start embodying some of those brilliant qualities that they have. Define your origin story for the hero, give it a name, give it a visual, give it a totem, and then start to embody their qualities. And one day you will actually be that version of yourself. Does that make sense? I really hope so. And if it doesn't, please, please, please go and grab the alter ego effect. I'm really keen to get Todd on this podcast. So please do share this podcast as well if you like it, and maybe include him in a tweet or in a mention, because I just love for him to express it in his own words. And interestingly, nobody's actually tried to put out any videos around this. There's been lots of podcast interviews with him, but I am attempting to in my vlog, which I will also share in this episode of the podcast in the show notes. So I'm really excited to test this out. I've already come up with a couple of alter egos that I want to embody for my triathlon training and my journey to the half Ironman. And I also now want to start adopting them, one for my relationships with friends, family, and my partner, Josh, and also one in the way in which I show up professionally. So I have some work to do. I'm going to be coming back to the concepts in the book. I'm going to be working through a lot of the positive emotions that are really around my heroes and my alter ego, because ultimately at the end of the day, you form this version of the alter ego by starting with, what do you believe? What do you expect? How do you want to feel? What do you want to do? What do you value? And you build those into this alter ego so that it's really aligned and resonates with your true core values. Because one other thing, you can't choose a superhero or some alter ego that totally doesn't relate to you in some way, that doesn't hold the same values as you. Otherwise, you just won't relate. It just won't work. So yeah, be true to yourself and really exemplify all the things that you'd love to show up in this world at, all the ways in which you want to up your brave, want to be more loving, more sexy, smarter, more confident, whatever it may be, more calm, more serene, any of these things. So you need to pick wisely when you're doing this. But I am really excited because the biggest thing for me and the biggest takeaway was you don't have to do this all alone. You just have to tap into your potential that already lives within you. And you just have to activate those characteristics that you see in your superheroes within yourself and ultimately become your own hero. Is that cool? I hope so. I have loved bringing this episode to you. As I said, you can find all previous episodes, including this one, and show notes at nataliesisson.com/podcast. And one final note, you may have noticed there's no sponsored adverts on this podcast, and that is because I purposefully want to keep it advert free. So if you'd like to support me in my endeavors to bring you a weekly podcast and weekly vlogs, and to learn and apply and teach these concepts to you so that you can tap in to your potential and live your best possible life, please also consider supporting or donating this podcast. The details are over at nataliesisson.com/podcast. There's a little support button and you can pledge or donate or buy me a coffee. I'd super appreciate it. Your contribution supports me in the work that I'm doing. You've been listening to Untapped with Natalie Sisson. Tune in next week for something awesome that's going to help you tap into your potential.